Hello, BookTube, and welcome to March Mystery Madness. This is a venerable BookTube event that was started by Lizzie Faye Loves Books and a whole bunch of other great BookTube channels. We're all hosting this year, in which for the month of March we celebrate all things murder mystery, a genre that almost everybody I know loves to one degree or another. They're kind of the lingua franca of the literary world. Almost everybody loves a murder mystery. There are some people I know who don't, who go out of their way not to, but most people, yes. I've known people, writers who could not stand to read novelists. I've known novelists who could not stand to read fiction of any kind. It just made their hair stand on end, as one of them put it. But they drew an exception for murder mysteries. I've known people in all walks of life, all kinds of jobs, including one very high profile, very busy job, whose occupant was known to me for years and who couldn't get enough of murder mysteries, took a pile of them to bed. At night, at 9, every night. One of the things I helped to host this event last year. And I started off last year on March the 1st with a sort of a definition of terms. I was talking a little about the rules of murder mysteries. In that case, I was reading from, I'll leave a link to the video down below. I was reading from one of the many classical decalogues of rules for what does and doesn't constitute a murder mystery, that you cannot have supernatural elements, that you cannot have clues that aren't known to the reader, you can't have multiple sets of identical twins or multiple hidden passageways or anything. You can't play dirty pool with your reader in terms of a murder mystery. Those rules, whether they're by Raymond Chandler or anybody else, boil down to that the author has to play fair with the reader. You have to set up a mystery that is solvable and that the reader might have a chance of solving without the detective if they're paying close enough attention, if they're on the right track. But it can't be too easy, and it certainly can't rely on coincidence or deus ex machina or anything like that. It has to be, in other words, a rational production from start to finish. And one of the reasons why a century ago those rules were starting to take off, all sorts of people were writing them, was because a century ago this genre really took off. It was a century and a little more. It was Sherlock Holmes and the popular literature, the penny dreadfuls and the mass production of magazines. The mystery genre is hand in hand with the boom of the pulp magazine genre. All of a sudden, you could deliver mysteries everywhere to everyone, and everyone likes them almost. And in the last century, that has gone on unabated. That is not true of all of the fiction genres that were born in that same wave, right? Nobody reads Westerns anymore. It used to be that only 50 years ago, a large chunk of pulp or genre mass market paperback publications would be Westerns. Now it's a handful of authors. You could read all of them in 1 month, every month, easily. And there are a bunch of other things too. There are a bunch of other types of genre fiction that have not prospered quite as well in the 100 years since then. But mysteries, boom, they are everywhere. And they're in all kinds of different shapes. And that's what I want to talk about this time. Last time I started off March Mystery Madness by laying out the ground rules. What is and is not a mystery. And I did it, I confess, mainly as a pretext to ask you. It was one of my favorite things to do on this channel, is simply to turn the question around and ask you, so that I can soak it all up in the comments field and in emails and whatnot. And I want to do that this time too. And I want to talk this time about the larger umbrella of murder mysteries. You're going to see them all throughout the month. My co-hosts and I. There are a great many of us, and if you get that many co-hosts, you're going to get the whole range of mystery reading. Because mystery as a genre is a huge umbrella that shelters a whole bunch of different splinter kinds. And they mix all around. The kinds themselves mix all around. There are some types of murder mysteries that were, for instance, a century ago, much more popular than they are today. For instance, you could arguably say noir. The hard-boiled mystery detective series is probably not as popular now as it was 100 years ago. Also, the locked room mystery used to have an incredible vogue. It doesn't really anymore. And other things have come to take their place. And I want to go through, I jotted down a few of those just to talk about them a bit and get your impressions, get your preferences. The first one I came up with is the police procedural, of course. I didn't come up with any of these. I mean, the first one I jotted down is the police procedural, and that is a murder mystery in which, yes, there has been a murder, maybe more than one murder. And yes, there are leaps of logic and intuition. There is deduction that takes place. But the machinery that gets the mystery solved is the machinery that gets house break-ins solved, parking violations solved. It is the machinery of the police administration. For some reason, that has always been popular with mystery fans. I think because on some deep atavistic level, those fans look at that police superstructure as an instrument of order. I mentioned last year that the mid-century snooty pseudo-intellectual Jacques Barzun characterized mysteries as stories in which order is drawn out of chaos. Now, in typical Jacques Barzun state fashion, that could be said about anything, including filling a shopping cart at the grocery store, that you have drawn order out of chaos. but nevertheless, if we talk about it, there is a certain element to that involved, because somebody dies in a murder mystery, and that is chaos. That is an exponent of chaos. When someone dies, when someone is murdered, that is an exponent of chaos, and you want an exponent of order to set that right. And the thing that has mostly been, in a very humdrum, prosaic way, is a police force. And I think that's why it has its fascination. There's a certain visceral level reassurance in a police procedural in thinking that this machinery will eventually set every wrong to right. Now, we know that's not true. We know that it doesn't. We know, in fact, that machinery often creates as many wrongs as it solves. But nevertheless, in the world of fiction, it's very comforting. And as in all of these cases, I want to know which of these you prefer. But in the case of police procedural, I want recommendations, because I'm going to be reading a lot of mysteries in the month of March. And I think I have enough books set up already to get me through the whole month. But I'm always up for recommendations. I've read a ton of police procedurals, and I have to admit, they're not my favorite kind. Because as much as I agree with all of those, those century ago rules about how rationality, about how ratiocination, how actual point-by-point plot solving has to be the basis of these things, and that is, of course, the basis of a police procedural, I still like the Sherlock Holmes level flash of genius. I like a detective who is set apart somehow. I like, in other words, a detective who is better at solving crimes than I am, or than the machinery is. Excuse me. And a lot of the signature charismatic detectives are like that. Whereas, when I read like a standard Scandinavian police procedural, the type that has just dominated the industry for 20 years now, I don't usually get that sense at all. I don't get the sense that any of these people would ever solve crimes if they didn't have the machinery of the police to help them, if they didn't have the coercive power of search warrants or whatnot. I get the impression that a lot of those characters are dim, and that doesn't go along well for me with murder mysteries. But they are enormously popular with other people, and certainly I've read lots of police procedurals that I loved. But then the next category I came up with, it's incredibly popular now, is the cozy mystery, and that is where the murder, this exponent of chaos, is almost beside the point. It's usually a trivial detail compared to the incredibly small, minute stakes that are involved everywhere else. Tea doilies, hedges, back gardens, little old ladies. It's almost an atmospheric novel without a murder. Almost. And I confess, again, I'm starting off with a couple of weak spots here, but I confess, cozy mysteries have always bugged me. I have read some, and I have liked some, and I know for a fact that a lot of my March Mystery Madness co-hosts love them to pieces. And I love that. I love seeing it. I love hearing it in TBR videos and hall videos and whatnot. But to me, there's a fundamental operational thing at work in a cozy mystery that has always bothered me. No murder is trivial. And for it to be, well, old Mrs. Parsons, someone snuck poison into her tea and she's dead, and we're kind of cozy and zany, and we have a little weatherproofed cottage, and we have a modest pension, and we've got glasses that we peer over, and we're going to sort of bumblingly but cutely solve the mystery. Well, okay, she's still dead, and she didn't want to be. That's something about that has always bugged me. that you're trying to have a murder mystery without the murder, essentially. Always struck me as counter works. And I'm wondering, I know for a fact that it doesn't bother perhaps the large majority of you. I'm curious to know. I know that among the people listening to me right now, there are tons of cozy mystery fans, and I'd love to know how you get around that. How do you square that? Do you just take a big step back and say, well, it's all fiction anyway? I don't. Every time I do that with the made-up stories in so-called literary fiction, I get rapped on the nose for it. Am I supposed to do that in cozy mysteries? Then we have something I like a lot more, the thriller, the suspense mystery, where, again, someone has died, usually many someones, and sometimes there's an element of mystery involved in who did it, how they did it, why they did it. But in the thriller, the emphasis is much more on the fear, on the visceral fascination of it all. There are always police in a suspense thriller, but the focus is really on the miniature schnauzer. I'll just lean forward like that. The focus is really on the insane passion of the act itself, I think. That's always at the heart, even when it's not being dramatized on the page. And I love them. I just love them. I think they bring out a lot of good stuff in their writers. They can be horribly sensationalistically purple prosed. And a lot of them are. I'll read a lot of thrillers. And a lot of them are not worth the paper they're printed on. But when the particular genius of the subgenre strikes the author, boy oh boy, then you are in for a ride. They're a lot of fun to read. Whereas, for instance, not to kick a dead marble, but cozy mysteries tend to they eliminate not only the horror of the murder, but they tend also to eliminate the fun. They just sort of dawdle along. Anyway, the next one I have here is historical. This has also blossomed enormously in the last, say, 70 years, right alongside the blossoming of the historical novel just in general. Historical fiction has never been more popular than it is now. And people have gone to every conceivable era in the past, and almost every conceivable famous person in the past, and made them a detective, imported murder crimes to almost every conceivable era. And I just love it because these authors have to do some research. They often end up by throwing a spotlight, sometimes on a more or less unilluminated little patch of history that they have made an obsessive research project out of for the last 2 years. And that's always fun. That's always tons of fun. And a lot of my favorite modern mystery series or standalone novels are historicals. For that reason, I love historical fiction anyway, and I love history anyway, and I love arguing with people who try to recreate it fictionally. There are some odd blank spots. There are far fewer, for instance, historical murder mysteries in which a monarch is the detective than I would have expected. Far fewer. There, as far as I know, I can think of only a handful. If you go back, especially to pre-modern times, you could, I think, do a lot better than that. And also, I could be wrong. There's one enormous book that has not been written, as far as I know. I could be wrong, but a straight-up serial killer novel set during ancient Rome, during the Rome of the Caesars, I don't think I've ever read. I don't think I know of such a book. And it seems like such an obvious combination. A serial killer in ancient Rome that I don't know if it has been written. I don't know how. I've never encountered it. But one way or another, I think that historical murder mysteries, of course, this is still an umbrella, right? Because you can have a historical mystery that is a cozy mystery. You can have a historical murder mystery that is a police procedural. I've read all of these. That's the thing I like about these little subcategories, is they slip and slide all over the place. The next one is the one that I mentioned. It's the hard-boiled detective. It's noir. And it is not written anywhere near with the prevalence that it once was, and I think I know the reason for that. I think it's pretty fairly obvious on its face, is that most hard-boiled noir fiction was not only explicitly but extremely vociferously sexist. And that doesn't work anymore. That hasn't worked in 40 years. And it certainly doesn't work in the woke 21st century. You can't... When a lot of those great old hard-boiled detectives referred to women as dames and broads, It wasn't just the lingo of the time. It was also that they considered them to be very attractive but very dangerous subhuman creatures. It's obvious in all of the literature. I can't stand it when people try to make a literary argument that that is not true. I'm sorry. I love a lot of that classic hard-boiled fiction as much as anybody. But it is irretrievably sexist. And also often irretrievably racist as well. And those just don't wear. And without them, you lose the lifeblood of the subgenre, which I think is why we don't get as much of that as we once did. And I confess, most noir writers that I have encountered think they're a lot more linguistically clever than they are. and it starts to show. And the only person who doesn't see it is them. And that gets embarrassing. That gets embarrassing. It was true for Raymond Chandler. It's pretty much going to be true for you. I mentioned one standout example of what I would consider to be old-fashioned, hard-boiled noir fiction that is still going on today and is still every bit as convincing, and that's James Ellroy. But those examples are rare. Very, very rare. The next one I have here is something called, I think of as the madcap caper. Again, it can happen in any of these subgenres. But the theme here, the emphasis here, is on the unpreparedness of the crime solvers, whoever they are, whether they're police or usually amateur crime solvers. That not only is the crime ridiculous, in itself, where a murder victim is found in a ridiculous scenario or an improbable scenario. But the detectives, the whole 9 yards of it, all of it, is just madcap and crazy. The Lovejoy mysteries, some of you might remember those. I think they're all out of print now. But you can come up with, like, for instance, Agatha Raisin is another thing where the emphasis is on madcap. The emphasis is on humor and unconventionality and yes, there's a murder, and yes, it is solved, but the whole thing is supposed to be a kind of grand caper, an adventure, mostly, with all of those things playing a subsidiary role. And again, as you can see, as you can probably predict from my reaction to cozy mysteries, I'm not a big fan of those. I love them on an entertaining level, but somebody has died who didn't want to die. I like it when that's given the solemnity that it deserves. And then the last one that I have mentioned here, and again, these can all mix and match with each other, is the location-based murder mysteries. These can be historical, and they can certainly be noir, and they can be pretty much any of these other cozy mysteries, almost always location-based. But you know what I mean, where the kind where there's a strong emphasis put on the feel of a place where the murders are taking place. Not in the fake and one-dimensional sense like Cabot's Cove, the Jessica Fletcher mysteries, where it's just a picturesque New England town, where 10,000 people have been murdered. It's a small picturesque New England town where 10,000 people have been murdered. But that's you can't pick Cabot's Cove out of a police lineup. And I don't think you're supposed to. I think the whole point is that it's supposed to be sort of a stand-in, cookie-cutter New England town. Whereas I'm talking more along. Actually, I have it here. The publisher just sent me these. Mariner just sent me these Ellie Griffiths novels. These are the Ruth Galloway mysteries. It starts off with The Crossing Places. These are a lovely new. You can't really tell on camera, but these have a textured cover, very somber, monochrome cover designs. The publisher just sent me these because she's got a couple of new books coming out, and Ruth Galloway is on the coast of Norfolk, and it's sea battered and it's gray and it's cold and there are marshes and there's the ocean, and it's a very integral part of all of these stories, and it's evoked tremendously well. And I'm sure you'll have favorites of your own that do that, and where you don't think about the series other than thinking about the location. That's what I mean. When the location is so prominent that it's completely connected with the series, regardless of whether or not the other categories that I mentioned are also a part. Like, for instance, Donna Leon's Inspector Brunetti series is definitely a police procedural series, but it's inextricably linked with Venice. It is a location series, and anyway. I wanted to bring this up just in general terms as we launch into March Mystery Madness. I'm going to spend most of my March Mystery Madness videos talking about specific books and series, I think. But I want to start off by getting a sort of a triangulation of what you like in this genre. Which of these things are your favorites, and what are your recommendations? Where and why do you like them? No, don't just fling titles at me, although I love that. I love the dialogue that we have on this channel. I love the fact that we're constantly recommending books to each other. But I also want to know why. Do you like, for instance, cozy mysteries because, as the name implies, they comfort you despite having a murder at their heart? Do you like are you a champion of the in my opinion dying subgenre of the noir? And if so, why? Do you see yourself as Sam Spade, as a sort of tarnished knight in shining armor? I want to know the whole discussion in the comments field about what you like, about what hits your sweet spot when it comes to murder mysteries. And I'm going to wrap this up for now but I will be back. I am right now, I know famous last words, but I am planning on doing a March Mystery Madness for video every day in March. If I can natter on about all kinds of stuff that bores you, like Angevin currency reverberation, I can certainly talk about murder mysteries every day this month. I will see. I will at least try. But either way, we'll have plenty of other book stuff to talk about, so I will be back. And welcome, on behalf of Elizabeth and Lizzie Faye Books and all my other co-hosts, welcome to March Mystery Madness. We're going to have a lot of fun this month. Anyway, I'll wrap this up, but I will see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.